he said, this is a technique and this is a technique. And that's not how I use the word. It would, you guys know how I use the word. So for me, the foundation is the four directions. That's the technique that allows everything else to be where I want it to be. And redirection is at the root of that, of course, because how do I get back to the four directions from anywhere else?
Right, I was thinking about that when you posted it this morning and I read it and I
Mhm.
thought, gee, the four directions is for me, the first thing that came to me was the four directions for me. Of course, it's a deliberate practice, but it feels more like a practice of awareness.
Yes.
And redirection is the actionable, they're both actionable,
Mhm.
but redirection um is what it is what the four direction affords me to be able to do more easily. I
Mhm.
could do redirection without, I mean, I could do redirection without the four directions, but I'll slip out of it quickly.
Yes.
The four directions is a place that grounds my awareness so that I can redirect,
Yeah.
so that I can use imagination, so that I can come up with techniques as the day unfolds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So an interesting thing is that when we are talking to ourselves, we are listening to ourselves, and that is a
Right.
closed feedback loop. So
Yes.
and it, it is a challenge for me not to go into the biological mechanisms, but I don't need to. So we know that that's a closed feedback loop. You
But that's
described,
how I started with words because that's
yeah,
all I knew.
right.
But eventually they disappeared. And that's why I brought up that example of meeting
Yeah,
that woman and that child because there were so few words
right.
and so much communicated
Hmm.
in a short amount of time that was from a very broad perspective that we recognized in each other immediately.
Yeah, we'll talk about that
And
too. Yeah, I think that's a good thing to talk about. That's a little bit, that'll get a little bit woo-woo, but this group is cool with that. So, um, but so the closed feedback loop is one where we're typically not aware of it, right? It's and what I mean by closed feedback loop is it starts to feed itself. It starts to generate, and one side of the coin is charging the other, and then the other, as it gets bigger, charges the other, and now they're feeding off of each other. Donna just described a different process of that, one that's more beneficial to the individual. And rather than being a repetitive, habitual, what's another word? Repetitive, habitual, but not just
loop,
habit.
loop,
It does it's a feedback loop because it's feeding each other. But we
and it's
create a different
closed.
one.
It's closed.
It's closed. And this one is more open and aware. It's a choice. It's more of a ritualistic thing as opposed to, and so the word I was trying to think of is the one that's the opposite of ritual, where you're in a routine, right? A routine, usually when we use that word, lacks present moment, volition, and awareness because it's just routine. It's a habit. We're used to doing it. But when we talk about a ritual, that implies that we're imbuing the moment with awareness. And so what Donna described is that the more that we do the four directions, the more we have the opportunity to see our own mind, our own thoughts, our own body, our own energy. And this can all be done with or without words. It just depends. Sometimes it's going to include words, especially in the beginning. We're going to be talking about these things to some extent to ourselves, and it's not repetitive. This is kind of the new way of looking at things when you first start this practice, and you're like, oh, okay. But of course, there comes a time when by doing the four directions, it allows you to catch things when they come up quicker because there is no such thing as perfection. So at some point, something is going to come out, and that is, it just is. If you wanted to, you could really trace it back to its origins and find out, like, where did this, it may also just come to you one day and you're like, oh yeah, I remember like when this first started for me, and like when this was being reinforced and I started to give this energy and it started to gain momentum, and then aha, I had this type of response. I took something personally. And, I have been doing that for decades, maybe my whole life, and I see that type of thing. But what we're creating is through the four directions, an ability to redirect quicker and sooner and more efficiently. And then by redirecting quicker and sooner and more efficiently, we reinforce the four directions. And then the four directions reinforces the ability to redirect quicker and sooner and more efficiently. And then some things, granted, eventually do start to fall away and they don't come up as much anymore. But some things still will, especially things that are tied to, there's a reason that people are constantly telling you, that you're a nice person or that they think you're a nice person, or, that I think that you were a nurse. Because if you trace everything back to the fundamental constituents, it all makes sense. Every human being, because it's hardwired into our brain, unless it's in a state of dysfunction, wants to feel safe in some way, shape, or form. Since we were whatever we were, we have been seeking and wanting to feel some semblance of safety. And what is one of our very first, typically, of course, there's always outliers, but typically and traditionally, one of our first moments of safety is with a mother, right? That's the baby is born and that's tumultuous shit, I'm sure. I don't remember, you probably don't remember, but it's gotta be, like that's gotta be one heck of an ordeal. And now all of a sudden, though, you're in warmth and you're in comfort. And typically the mother is talking in the baby voice and everything, and that's soothing. And it's like, oh, okay. And then hunger starts to come, and it's like, now hunger goes away because that need was met almost instantly. And it's like safety, and then safety associations. And yeah, you exude that. So I think that when somebody is around you, it's very easy for them to sense into the bubble of perception that you're creating around yourself. And that bubble of perception to another person, even though that's not something you're doing with words and it's not your intention, and you probably never even would have thought about it if they hadn't have told you, but you are creating a bubble that is filled with an energy that others can perceive as very safe. And then that's very comfortable. And, we could talk about the weather, but we also don't have to, because I feel so safe with you that I can just go straight to the gist, straight from the heart type of thing.
Well, I think it's also being seen and heard. It's what everybody wants, right? Certainly what I want. When I don't feel seen and heard, that's when I feel triggered. And I have to redirect. But that's mine that comes up right away. Of course, safety is first, but emotional safety comes from being seen and heard. So when someone, and that's really the most interesting thing about other humans to me, is who they are and what makes them tick and what principles are at play and how different we are, but how the essence of us is so much in common. Like that is the most interesting thing for me and the most fulfilling, rewarding. That's what makes me want to be around other people. If I'm not doing that, I really don't want to be around other people because I feel distracted from my own piece from, but when I'm seeing that in them, and so I think when you feel seen and heard, that's an emotional safety. So it's still the same principle you're talking about, but not just physical safety. You feel safe to express yourself when someone sees you and hears you and accepts you who however you show up.
Yeah. And I think the origins may have still been physical safety, but through cognitive evolution, of course, now we have emotional safety. And now we have a type of non-physical, very difficult to describe, that maybe we would even want to call like a spiritual safety. That I know that this, and that's the stuff that does show up on memes and things like that. Like we maybe use terms like energy vampire. This is just a way for people to try to describe a phenomenon that we're all experiencing. And that could be when maybe our spiritual energy is in a bubble of perception of someone else that isn't as safe, or, and then we could take it back to emotion, and then we could take it back to even physical.
it was all energy that I saw
Yeah,
in that child. It wasn't
right.
necessarily what she was actually doing, although
Of
there was
course.
evidence there of her maturity in a little as a little girl. But she just beamed. I couldn't comment on it without just talking about energy. Like she is a
Yeah.
bright light, like because that's the first thing I
Sure.
noticed and the first thing I said. And then so was the mom in a different way. And then she spoke directly to how she got that from her mom. And so she knew what I was talking about, even though all I said was bright light. Um, so, and she attributed that to God for her source, something greater than herself. Without it being dogmatic, I understood what she was saying. We understood each other. I don't even know
Yeah.
how to explain it.
No, it does make sense. Yeah. And I think we have at times talked about when things are unobstructed, they tend to flow between the 2 points. And like you said, it's being heard, it's being felt, it's being um, communicated, not separate from the words. The words may be there, you're still having a conversation, but there's another conversation that's happening between the physical body and the energy body. And I think that's a very important point for me. And it doesn't have to be for you, but my 4 directions gives me the opportunity, as Donna pointed out, to redirect sooner and more efficiently. And what do I redirect back to? The 4 directions. And because I do that, I reinforce the 4 directions and I create more space, more opportunity to learn, more opportunity to grow, more opportunity to communicate, to hear other people, to where I could maybe repeat them back. And I become more accessible to power, and I could, and I mean the forces outside of my bubble of perception that are coming in. I can be more accessible, or my bubble of perception in a certain state could become more perceptible to yours. And when I talk about bubbles of perception, this is just another way of talking about stuff. And I think that we've talked together long enough that it's like, okay, I kind of know what Ernest is talking about. So it's just good words to use so we can communicate. But the 4 directions creates what I call the bubble of perception. How? Like, what does that mean? Well, I am keenly aware, hopefully, of some aspect of what we would commonly consider our exterior environment, whether that's a sound that's occurring, I'm doing something with my visual acuity, I'm somehow maybe paying attention to certain scents, especially like early spring, or since I found out that humans can smell a very small amount of it's that it's that just rain in the soil smell. And I was fascinated by that. So I've been trying to like after it rains, I'm just going out there. I'm like, can I smell that?
Smells different than snow, too. Smells
Yeah.
like rain, smells like rain's coming, smells like snow's
Mhm.
coming.
And
Yeah.
of course biologists are, they're really interested in what does that mean, like evolutionarily, like it must mean that humans were trying to find water sources, and it's all just fascinating. But the bottom line is that for me, this practice creates what I call the bubble of perception. And so I'm creating this bubble through the 4 directions. My body is inside of that bubble of perception. It's the center of it. And I'm aware of that because that's one aspect of my 4 directions. My breath is what is expanding and actually creating what I consider like the cocoon or shell-like structure of this bubble of perception. And then my cognitive direction, in the beginning, I would just sometimes imagine like a shell or a cocoon-like structure. That's why I'm using that term. But there's a lot of implications with the bubble of perception. There is you're filling it with yourself, right? And there's implications in terms of conscious creation. Donna mentioned several times that a lot of her life experience seems to be very purposeful. It seems to be very educational. It seems to be very deliberate. And of course, that is when we fill that bubble of perception. What are you doing on a spirit scale? Right? You're filling it, like you're putting your perception out there. You're expanding, but you're still aware of your body. So it's not going to go too far aloof because you're still grounded in the physical, the corporeal soul is balancing and interacting with that ethereal and energetic aspect that Donna's talking about. And for me, in my practice, that is of vital importance because that's where conscious creation also comes from. I am placing the things in that bubble of perception, including my emotional state. Everything is in that bubble of perception. My emotional state is in that bubble of perception. So it's a part of my personal practice, doesn't have to be yours, but all throughout the day, I call these considerations because it is more tricky to hold this. Like it's so I consider, where is my emotion in this moment? What am I filling into my bubble of perception? And is it deliberate? Is it intentional? Is it what I want? And then every now and then, an understanding of why or why it isn't will arrive on its own, and I can learn from that. But for me, this practice, the four directions, redirection, everything that we're talking about, is to create this, and I kind of referred this as I referred to this as hydrostasy, or an effect of you are filling. And a lot of the times I would fill my cognitive direction with imagining that I'm filling this with light, filling this with energy. And so to me, it's getting a little bit more out there, but I can only maintain this bubble of perception with the four directions and with certain considerations, such as death as my advisor, such as taking personal responsibility for all of my thoughts, all of my actions, and that's kind of how sometimes these views, they go well beyond what people are normally talking about, or sometimes maybe even ready to talk about, right? Because it's a very personal thing. That's why Don Juan always referred to it as personal power. We have no business trying to evaluate or judge or interact unless we're asked certain questions, or there's, in his world, certain omens. And then real quick, Donna, before I take the hand, I see you have a raised hand. But I have to mention that in Chinese medicine, they look at things in terms of yin and yang, but not as polar opposites. It's how are they interacting? How are they changing? And from birth, being born to about 7 or 8 is called basically energy brightness, energy rising. And the way that this is viewed in Chinese medicine is you can look at a figure of a human, and at the top is Shen, and that's spirit. And then you have the human being, but spirit is considered more yang. It's higher. It's the active fundamental activity and motor force behind everything. So of course, through thousands of years of observation, the Chinese have noticed through medicine that children at this age are Shen Yang brightness. Their eyes. Where do we see Shen in Chinese medicine? It is seen through the eyes, of course, and then from the eyes, it's seen in the complexion, it's seen in the posture, it's seen in the excitement, it's seen in the complete lack of psychological suffering and interference from psychological processes that get in the way of our ability to connect to the universe around us just naturally, just doing it, right? Soaking it up and dishing it out. Yeah, they're soaking it up, but at a certain age, if they're left allowed to, they'll give you something to soak up, right? They'll exude that energy, and it's totally natural. It's totally cool. It's totally okay. Excuse me, I just want to say that this is actually, according to Chinese medicine, that this is the most natural time, and it is still going to be yang energy for quite some time, right? Like, because we still have our high school, we still got our hot-blooded, times, and of course we're getting more towards, as a species, got to procreate, and that's a lot of yang energy. And then you get to where some of us in this group are now, we're starting to settle a little bit into the yin, right? Where yang is something that we really have to try to create a practice around so that we can also have that brightness in our bubble of perception, because the world has a lot of that interference, and that interference fundamentally suffocates it. That's what we would call when we would talk in like law of attraction speak, that is interference. That is what the resistance is, this resistance um factor that is being introduced between what should be two smoothly flowing. And is it two? Not really, but we have this mind and this body, so we often do perceive things as binary opposites. That's how we perceive them. You got to work with that. So that's great stuff, and I think that is a really important point regarding the practice and what we're doing. And I think that Shayna and we had felt that type of thing. Sometimes it happens through practice, sometimes it can happen through happenstance too, where we were traveling to Sedona and we just met people and just spoke and interacted with those people because we were traveling and there was less resistance. We were in the vacation mode. We're like, everything is new and bright, and let's get some crystals and let's do some meditation and go on some hot. And that is one way of arriving there. And I'm not taking anything away from it either. That is a way of arriving there. Maybe that can be included as a ritualistic thing someday that you want to do. Who cares? But yeah, and then synchronicity is a word to describe basically when Shen is aligned with, or Shen, as I'm using this word, is spirit, right? It's the opposite of the physical. And we're just talking about this in very basic ways to talk about it. It's not the right way of talking about spirit and energy. It's just we have can't see, very, very rarefied, scattered, seemingly maybe, and then more coalesced. That's the way we have to work with our environment. So sometimes we talk that way.